Brandon, you are someone who I have known for, I don't even know. Feels like forever.
How old's Henry?
Henry is 5.
So about 5.5 years.
Yeah. You know what's weird? It feels like I've known you my whole life. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But yeah, 5.5 years, so a long time. And you are someone who I've turned to on many occasions for help in life and help with leadership and help with decisions I've been making and things, on and on and on and on. We won't go into the boring details for the community. But how did you get into the work that you do now, which is, I'm going to put it in my own terms, and then you put it in yours, which is coaching leaders, creating leaders, and helping them accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, make an impact in the world, and go about. I mean, you are someone who makes such an impact, and for whatever reason, you're like, this could be your first podcast you've ever done. Like, I'm not sure. Like, it's kind of crazy, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's start with the beginning. How did you become Brandon Craig?
You'll have to ask my parents that. They had much to do with it. Yeah, so, there's a lot of ways I could answer, but I think probably the most efficient way is that I, at a certain point, discovered that the nature of being a human being is not what it looks like. And, it's easier to see that in other people, more difficult to see it in yourself. And over time, through my own career, discovered the power of understanding more about what it is to be a human being and the relationship that has to leadership. And of course, through my own experiences, there was some advantage to discovering that, just in terms of leading. And, I founded my own company and grew that business and, discovered a lot of success in the domain of leadership. And that's really how I landed myself into what I'm doing now for the last 16 or 17 years.
Yeah. What does it mean to be a human being?
We don't have that much time. I don't know. I don't think we do. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to ask the person that, I think that is a fundamental question that is going to be independent to the person answering it. Mm-hmm. And what it means to me is, so there's a difference between what does it mean to be a human being and what does it mean to discover the nature of being a human being. Mm-hmm. So which one of those questions would you want me to answer?
Let's start with the second one. What does it mean to discover the nature of being a human being?
It changes everything.
Yeah.
Like it changes everything. It gives you access to the ability to create and to create anything. And creation for me is, synonymous or somewhat synonymous with leadership.
When you went through the process of discovering what it means to be a human being, what did you...
I'm still going through it.
Still going through it, but like, what have you learned along the way so far?
There's some fundamental things that, are somewhat downstream from the nature of the question, but one of those things is that everybody's doing the best they know how. Like literally, it take any circumstance, any set of conditions, any person, and you can somehow freeze time and discover what you will discover is that they are doing the very best they know how. And when we look back, and I think this would be useful for your viewers and listeners to really look, is when a person looks backwards, they tend to find themselves thinking that's not the case, even for their own behavior. But it's the experiences they've had that's enlightened them or given them a sense, a new frame of reference or a new context that gives them the ability to notice that there's something different or some other way of being or some different access to a different set of possibility that they didn't see back in a condition or a situation. But it's only looking back that you're able to see that. So the reality is, if you really get honest and accurate with yourself, like you're doing the best you can or the best you know how in any set of circumstances. And the value of that for you is useful, but it's way more useful to recognize that while that's happening for you, it's also happening for everyone else.
Yeah.
So when you get into high stake relationships,
Yeah.
and you've got somebody that misbehaved or wasn't, didn't behave the way you wanted them to, or they didn't act the way you thought they ought to have, it's really useful to recognize that what was happening at that point for them was that they were just doing the best they knew how to do.
Yeah, you said something really interesting there. And the word that came up for me is like forgiveness. Like as you were talking, like the ability to like forgive others for sure. But you said something interesting there that I think would be really useful to double click on for this show is the ability to forgive yourself. When you look back on things and you're like, man, I was like really dumb, or I really hurt X person, or I really made a mess of things when I did that. Looking at it from the lens that you just described, which is like, you were doing the best you could at the time. And that's probably true of most people, right? I mean, that can't be true for all people. Do you think it's true for all people? That everybody's like trying to do good?
No, I didn't say anything about doing good.
They're doing the best that they can.
Yeah.
Which could be like bad or good. They're trying to do the best they can at whatever they're trying to go about doing.
For sure. But look, so we have to look a little closer at what we're actually saying, because you're highlighting something that's at play when you in a sense, in order to forgive, you would have to see the situation or see what occurred as as a judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're going to make a judgment against it, so to speak. And in order for you to have a reason to forgive another person, you would have to see it like a judgment. And this is a we're getting into some deep water, so to speak. But the reality is that there's not a usefulness in the judgment. So while that's how you hear it as this idea that, oh, okay, Brandon, that's good to know. Like if I'm moving through the world and somebody has hurt me in some way, oh yeah, it gives me a space to forgive them if I can be open to the idea that they were doing the best they can. What I'm saying is, when you really actually understand the nature of what I'm describing, in that a person does the best they know how to do in a given set of circumstances, there's no need for forgiveness. It's just assessment. You can just see it for what it is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's no need for judgment at that point.
No. Assessment, sure, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, if somebody hurts you, yeah, you want to protect yourself. Like, of course. But like the need to forgive, yeah, that's a very human driven need.
Yeah.
Very ego driven. It's very, amygdala driven need.
Good. Say more about that. I'm super interested in this. The need to forgive is a very human or ego driven need.
Well, so yeah, the way I would say you could get access to it quickly is just look at something that you've done.
Yeah.
And you find out, you discover that it's caused hurt for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you mean to? In this case, let's say you didn't mean to.
Mm-hmm.
So what's more important to you? That they forgive you, or that they discover that you didn't mean to hurt them?
The second one, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's way more effective.
Yeah.
I mean, we could translate all this into, the domain of the business environment where we often look at leadership.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it looks like a person that doesn't perform, let's say, on a certain project, or a team member that's not performing, or let's say a leader that you report to that doesn't lead the way that you believe they ought to. Yeah, I mean, it's all consistent. We could apply it to all of it.
What is leadership?
Yeah. I want to ask you what you think leadership is. Just for the sake of it, if that works for you.
Well, it's unfair for me to answer that question knowing your answer.
Yeah.
Particularly like you just recently wrote. You just recently wrote a piece which published on this exact topic. And so like the thing that for me to do here would be to just repeat your answer.
Yeah, so you've been influenced, right?
Yeah, I've been influenced.
Can you imagine though, like how most people that are watching or listening to this might answer that question? Just without the influence of what you and I have looked at or the work we've personally done together.
Yeah. Well, if I take out like our experience together, like I would view it, and I imagine a lot of people would view it as like the ability to inspire others. And like when we think of like great leaders of the past, you think of like John F. Kennedy or Lincoln or Nelson Mandela. I mean, Winston Churchill, all these people. Like, go down the list of like whoever you think a good leader is, right? We'll stay out of the current folks who are still alive for obvious reasons. But like whoever you think is like a good leader, the one commonality for me is that they had the ability to inspire. And they had the ability to rally a group of people to go about something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
So that might be like, I think maybe a lot of people, honestly, Brandon, might think of leadership as like the ability to communicate really well. Everybody I just mentioned is like a good speaker, right?
Yeah.
Or like, so yeah, I think like from a naive, never have experienced you or like your definition of leadership, my guess is most people would rally around some version of that definition.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's nothing inaccurate about what you've shared. Like anybody could, I think if you could relate to that, yeah, it would be a cost to say that's not leadership. But I would say that's a downstream effect of leadership. So perhaps you tell me if you think we ought to, shall I speak into this idea of downstream? Because I don't want to just make an assumption. Yeah. So I like to think in terms of process, and downstream for me is something that a lot of times we're working with. So I picture let's say we're hiking, we're on a several day hike and we've run out of water, and we're looking to set up a camp somewhere, and we come across a stream, and we're all thirsty, but we're all smart enough to know that we're going to test the water. We want to make sure the water is not going to make us sick or even kill us. Mm-hmm. And so we test the water, and we discover that the water has some form of contamination in it. And so the human nature and the nature of how a lot of times we approach leadership, as I experience it with the world and the nature of how things are going, and the reason why we can't speak a lot about current day leaders, unfortunately, is that we approach that stream and the contaminated water right where it is, and we move to action, and we look to find a way to purify the water. And in a sense, if we're going to set up camp there, we need to find a way that's going to like continue to purify the water. So we carve off some of the stream, and we go to work, and we put a machine or process in place, and we begin to purify the water. And once we recognize that it's clean, then we begin camping, so to speak. And to me, that's a downstream solution to an upstream condition. And the condition is the water's contaminated. There's nothing wrong with contaminated water. Maybe that water would work really great for a lot of things. Maybe it would work great for watering crops. Maybe most animals can drink the water and it doesn't hurt them. But what I want to do as a leader is I want to get access upstream. I want to find a way to solve for the contamination. So it's not something that's at play for me anymore. So that's what I mean when I go upstream. What that looks like is, yeah, how do I travel? I might leave the the majority of our party there. We might makeshift something to get our thirst handled in the short term, but I'm going to go upstream and discover where is this thing being contaminated. And if I can solve that, then I have access to all the water that's flowing downstream. So that's what I mean when I say upstream versus downstream.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your question, remind me of your question.
Just what is leadership and in comparison particular to how other people or the majority of the population might view it?
Yeah. So the things that you shared are much of which occurs for me as downstream. For example, being a good communicator.
Yeah.
Well, we can say the water's clean when I'm a good communicator.
Yeah.
Like that solves something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is leadership. It also means to me that somebody that doesn't occur for themselves as a good communicator then has no access to leadership.
Yeah.
If how they see leadership is that. And if whether they think that or whether the people that they're leading think that, it's a factor at play that's downstream. I want to go upstream, and that's what I've discovered in this, the nature of being a human being and how that relates to leadership is, and that's the nature of the work that I do, is I take people upstream and help them discover how to be a leader and who they would need to be a leader as their natural self-expression, as them. So, many of us have tried on the hat of leadership by, looking to be somebody that occurred for us as a great leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and there's just one challenge with that. I mean, there might be more than one, but one we can identify. It's inauthentic.
Yeah.
And we all know what it's like to be led by somebody that's being inauthentic. At some level, we've had that experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not very powerful. It's not very impactful. So back to the question. So what is my definition of leadership? So leadership to me is to create a future that was not going to happen. So yes, we have a life and we have certain ways in which our lives are already happening, and we have an almost certain future, a default future, something we could just count on, relatively count on, like, however it's going. I like to think of it like if you somehow could create data and some sort of measurement or assessment of the past, and then do the same thing in the present, and you draw a line through that. That line is gonna go out into the future somewhere, and wherever you pick a point in the future, that's an almost certain future. If you don't do anything different than what you've done, you're gonna realize the same sort of output or outcome that what you've done. It doesn't mean you're not growing. Like growth could do that. Digression could do that. You look at relationships. You look at take a marital relationship. Yeah, I mean, look at the past, look at the present, draw a line. Where's it headed? And there's nothing wrong with wherever it's headed, and it might really work for you. That's great. And then there's no leadership to get access to. Just keep doing what you're doing, whatever form that is. So leadership for me is to create a future that was not going to happen. So something different than what I just described. So what we're really looking at is to create a created future. So leadership is to create a future. So I've got to be a person that has cause in the matter of creating a future that was not going to happen, that fulfills on or attempts to fulfill on the needs of all the relevant parties. Well, yeah, that's as a person that has been led and continues to be led in many different ways, having my needs considered is a factor of leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see that, and what do you see in that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting when you think about like having your needs considered. What does that look like what's an example of someone believing that they do that, but they're not actually doing that, considering the needs of others?
Yeah. An example from which perspective?
From the person who is
being led.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't occur for them like leadership.
Yeah.
It probably occurs for them more like force or
manipulation. Yeah.
Coercion, something that doesn't see in the domain of leadership, as I like to see it, and as I've discovered how to create it in leaders. Like you've got to learn how to discover those needs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, it's a pretty broad, to create a future that fulfills on or attempts to fulfill on the needs of all the relevant parties. That's a big statement. Let's say I'm running a company and I've got a executive team, and then I look at my leadership as it cascades through the organization. Eventually I get down to every team member that's in the organization, and they're all relevant parties. And then I start to look beyond that. Who are the other relevant parties? Well, technically, like my family's a relevant party. Perhaps my wife, my kids, relevant parties. And each of their wives and kids or spouses or husbands or significant others or whatever else they have in their life that would have it be relevant. And technically, like that cascades all the way through the organization. And that's before we look at, our customers. We have clients, mm-hmm. and we would want to consider the needs of our clients and our vendors. Yeah, and perhaps even our community leaders. Like so as a leader, I've got to learn how to discover, number one, like, who are the relevant parties?
Yeah.
And then I've got to learn how to discover what their needs are. Now, there's a hierarchy of value in those needs.
Sure.
Meaning, if you look at the definition, leadership is to create a future that was not going to happen, that fulfills on or attempts to fulfill on the needs of all the relevant parties. I already know I'm not gonna meet everyone's needs.
Yeah.
But I've got to consider them, and I've got to consider how it could be to fulfill on those needs. So if I'm running a company and I've got a team member that I discover has a relative that's just contracted an illness, is that a big deal? Well, it is. It likely is to that team member.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would want to consider their needs in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I also have the needs of the rest of the business. Like I can't throw all the rest of the needs of the business out for one person's needs. So as a leader, I've got to learn how to really survey and assess and relate to the needs that I have discovered, and also have to have a space for their needs that I have not yet discovered. That's important as well. Like any leader attempting to lead effectively, moving through the world, making an assumption that they know that they're fulfilling on everyone's needs. Yeah, they're asleep. They're not doing that, I promise.
Yeah.
And then there's one last component I would say about the concept of this is that a lot of times someone doesn't actually know what their needs are. So, like, as a leader, part of me becoming an effective leader is not only discovering someone's needs, but helping them discover their needs.
Yeah.
And that's not, I mean, there's just a lot we could say about it.
Yeah. I mean, what is the process of discovery? Like, the example you gave is kind of interesting. Like, hey, someone contracted an illness in the family or a relative or whatever it was, right? There's an issue in the family, in my employee's family. But how do you anticipate people's needs if they don't even know what they need a lot of the times? Or without constant communication? Like, I mean, how do you do this? Particularly as you have like a big team, you have like an executive team, you have, your management team, you got, the whole company from there on out. How do you do this? What is that process like?
So I want to approach that from another angle. So the only way you can do it in an organization is to, as a leader, let's say a CEO of the business, you've got to become a person who exercises leadership effectively as your natural self-expression, and then you create leaders under you, and that cascades down through the organization. It takes time.
Mm-hmm.
The more effective you as a leader are at that, and the more energy and the more work that you put into that, meaning, well, let me be careful how I say that. So the more energy and time that you put into that as an effective leader,
mm-hmm.
the more the more quickly and the more effective, so to speak, that can happen. And that's that's part of the methodology that I've created and have been working with companies for several years doing that very thing. I work with the leader at the top, and then we get a head start, and then we end up bringing on the executive team, and we work with those leaders. And in a sense, like, we are with them in a way that we would have them see the effectiveness and the value, while at the same time solving for and helping them navigate the needs of the business. And then they naturally, through their own self-expression, begin to demonstrate that same level of leadership with their direct reports, and that cascades to the organization.
Like, that becomes contagious throughout the organization. Like, they see, like, hey, this person is showing up differently. This leader or manager or executive or CEO is showing up differently. I like the way they're showing up. What they're doing is, what I'm experiencing is leadership as their natural self-expression, as you say in your terminology. And that then rubs off in some way, or it becomes like part of them. They're like, I want more of that. How does that transfer?
Well, how does leadership transfer anyways?
Yeah.
Like, you began talking about leadership. You said, like, leadership is to inspire.
Uh-huh.
Is that the word you
use?
Yeah. Well, what is inspiration? Is it something that you physically put on the notebook and then you hand it to somebody, they open it up and read it, and they're like, okay, there it is. There's the inspiration. No, it's like, it's some sort of impact that happens outside of a person, but it happens because of who they were being.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a sense, what you're pointing at is what I call power. It's this impact that happens outside of a person that stems from who they're being, in this case, as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And as that happens, that power has an impact outside of them in a way that produces outcomes that are consistent with what that leader desires. So, if we go back to the definition,
mm-hmm.
to create a future that was not going to happen, what is that future? Well, like, we got to know what that future is.
Mm-hmm.
We call that a vision in the larger term of the word. Like,
mm-hmm.
Companies spend, leadership teams spend hours and hours, hundreds of hours, and a leader, a good leader, will surface out of them a vision, and that vision is, it's a way of putting language to a future that was not going to happen. And when you can do that accurately, in a way that when it's used and who you're being, has a person have an experience of you seeing that that's possible. It doesn't mean you know how it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's neither here nor there for me. And notice that's not part of the definition of leadership, like to create a future that you know how to get there. No, Some of the greatest companies on the planet have created futures that, you could say that almost nobody thought was even possible.
Yeah.
Well, and I say almost nobody because somebody thought it was possible or
Yeah.
wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
We would have just had a default future. So as a leader, I got to create a vision, and I got to live into that vision. I got to be clear about that vision, and part of that clarity is I've got a responsibility to put accurate language around that. Well, what is leadership in our everyday lives look like as a leader? So it's easy for us to point at this and talk about a CEO, but like, what about that person that you're talking about that's maybe a middle manager that's looking to have an impact on one or many of their team members, or just the outcomes that they're about? Or let's even look at it like more responsibly. What about a line level person that wants to be a leader and create a future that was not going to happen, like a company that they want to work at, or like a person that they report to that doesn't, they don't love working with, or that, they don't relate too well, or so what, they just have to deal with that? No, like we all have access to the possibility of leadership. So translate that into our homes. If you have children, how do you be a leader with your kids or your children in a way that would produce a future that's not going to happen? That could be as simple as, look, I know the almost certain future is that bed's not getting made tomorrow.
Yeah.
So how do I be with my child in a way that's not force, not coercion, not manipulation? Because like we know as adults, those things don't work. They don't produce long-term. They might produce some downstream impact, but then we just got what we got.
Yeah.
We don't get access to any more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, you said a few things here. There's one in particular I want to touch on, and that is being. You said the word being a lot. I think as we go through definitions here in this conversation, being would be a good definition for you to give here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. So so we all know, so as fun as it is for me, hopefully, the people that are a part of this can see how useful this is, how much fun this is to look at. As a human being, we know that we have something at play called being. And, that's a fundamental aspect of the nature of the work that I do, because any leader that you study, any leader that I've studied, I'm able to see that who they're being has an impact outside of them. And the question is, well, let me say more about that. Who they're being has an impact outside of them, and that impact outside of them is consistent with the outcome that they desire. I didn't say it is the outcome, but it's consistent with it. So it would be really ignorant or unintelligent to approach leadership without looking at being. And what I've discovered is that the nature of leadership is all about being. It's so for about the last 150 years as a society, as I've seen it, the nature of leadership has been approached epistemologically. That's a word that many people may know. If you don't know what it means, for me, it means the study of knowledge. So, and I imagine you probably can relate to that. It's like, well, I got a new opportunity that's come up, or I have a new task to go create, some new future to go create. And there is this this feeling of like, I need to know how to do it, or I need to get the knowledge. So I don't blame the way we've gotten to where we've gotten, but unfortunately, it's just not working very well. It just doesn't actually produce leaders. Knowledge does not produce leaders. So, and we can see that. We can look around and we can notice quite clearly that we can, we ourselves can have a profound education. We can get the latest books. We can study all the concepts, and just that alone is not going to produce us being an effective leader. So being an effective leader, we've got to look at being. And there's a study that looks at being. It's called ontology. And ontology is just that. It's the study of being. And one of my favorite things to look at in the domain of being is in professional sports. I know you like professional sports.
Of course.
And, you can look at an athlete on the court. Let's just pick basketball. And who's one of your favorite players?
Kobe, Steph, all the normal, Jordan.
Okay. I like Jordan. I like all those three, but let's just take, pick one of them.
Let's do Jordan.
Jordan. Okay. So you could take back when Jordan was playing the game, and you could watch him playing the game. And as a spectator, what you could see is there's a lot happening, and but you don't know what's happening. But one thing you do know is that there's something happening over where Jordan is at times. I'm not saying it's 100% of the time, but at times where he's in a sense being the game. It's like what somebody might call, in the flow. It's like they don't exist for themselves. They show up. So if you could somehow pause time and get, Michael Jordan to look at himself, and you'd say, who is that? He'd say, I don't know who that is. Really, if he's being honest, I don't know who that is. I mean, that looks like me. That guy, I mean, I know how much time I've put into the game. I know how much practice I've done. I know, but ultimately, like, that guy he's dialed into the game in a way that I'm not sure, I'm not even there when I'm there. Like, I know it's me, but I become the game, so to speak.
Yeah.
And we can follow him through the game as a person in the stands, and we could get to the end of the game, and let's say, as Jordan often did, he made some game-winning play at the end, and the sports commentator can come up and say, hey, so tell us, like, how did you know to do that? They go through the standard questions, and if you listen to those questions, for the most part, most players, especially the ones that are the greats, you could say great leaders in the game, are the way they answer the question is, I don't know. I just knew. I don't know. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. Like, well, have you practiced that play? No, we've never practiced that play. We've practiced plays like that. We've practiced thousands of plays. We've practiced together. But, there was so much. I mean, they wouldn't say all this, but, if you could somehow slow them down enough, they'd say, well, there was a lot of things I was taking in. I don't remember actually being there. I was there in the sense that I knew it was me, but I was so connected to what was happening that I could see that if I went right, it wasn't going to work. So I went left, and I passed the ball instead of taking the shot, and And some of that were decisions that were made, like, right now. Like in the very point in time that they made it, less than a second in most cases. Well, okay, so we're looking at this idea of being. It's like, well, who's the player being? Well, they're being the game. They're not being them. They're not thinking about them. The players that think about them are not those kind of players. We know that because we're not those kind of players when we think about us. Like, go give a speech in front of 1,000 people. What kind of a speech will you give? Well, like, if you're thinking only about you when you give the speech, like, you won't even know most of what you said because you're in your head about you'll get done. And you won't feel like, and you literally won't have produced the kind of experience or the kind of outcome that you would have wanted. So here's something else that's kind of interesting, or at least to me, it's interesting when we look at the sports illustration. I can go study the game of basketball. I can jump and I can dribble the ball, and I have access to the same rules as Michael Jordan did. And I can learn those rules inside and out. I can even study plays. I can even have the benefit of studying him as a player. And does that mean that now, because I put in all that time, I can be as good or even better than him on the court?
No.
Yeah, now I could have my own version.
Because that's like who he is, right? That's probably what you're saying here is, like, him being the greatest of all time or whatever, like that's like who he is.
Yeah, but I'm looking at it even different than that, Clint. What I'm saying is who he is. It doesn't have anything to do with the knowledge of the game.
Right.
He does need the knowledge. Like, he needs to know the rules. Like, he
Right.
can't grab the ball and not dribble it and run down the court and,
Sure.
throw this beautiful slam dunk and everybody look the other way on the rules. No, there's rules.
Yeah.
So you need knowledge. Knowledge needs to instruct you. But who you're being isn't in relationship to the knowledge. So we know that epistemology does not produce leaders. So what's even fun for me, and I hope fun for you to look at, is if we take the same illustration, my question is who are most of us? I'm going to just throw a number out there without the intention of offending anybody, but some of you are probably going to get, your ears are going to perk up when I say this. Who's the 98 out of 100 people in that illustration? Like, how do they occur for themselves? Are they a Michael Jordan? Or are they, one of the other players? Are they one of the players on the bench? Yeah. Or are they the coach? Or are they the trainer? The water boy running back and forth, water person? And my experience is that, 98 out of 100 of us are none of those things. Like, we think we're in the game.
Yeah.
Like, we totally think we're in the game, but we're actually sitting in the stands.
Yeah.
We're the player in the stands that's watching the game, and we have a lot to say about the game.
Yeah.
Like, we can say things about the game, about everything in the game. And for most, like, again, 98 out of the 100 I'm saying it's the majority of people. And I'm talking about people that are leading.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, we're all leaders. We're all creating futures of some kind. For sure. They are sitting in the stands, and can they affect the game? Of course they can. But the ability to affect the game is very limited. Like, maybe I can say something, maybe I can throw something on the court, maybe I can, get the player to lose some concentration for a moment by what I say. Maybe I can get the coach riled up, of the opposing team, or maybe I can affect the team I want to win. Maybe I can send some positive language and vibes out to the player that I want to, and maybe that does something for them. But ultimately, like, the possibility set for me as a leader in the stands is very limited compared to if I had the ball on the court and I were one of the 5 people on the team.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, as like furthering on this analogy, like, this is why you see like professional athletes just dismiss the talking heads who talk about the game the next morning. Right. Or who like know all the stats, know the stats better than the players know the stats, right? Like this,
stats don't win games.
Yeah, they're like, hey, yeah, you did this, but like in 1973, Oscar Robertson did this, and I don't know, like, or like, hey, look at this, and the players are like, yeah, but what does that have to do with like being on the court? Being on the court is just a completely different thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, as you were saying that, it just made me think of like all these people who make a living talking about sports and how, like, for the most part, they're despised by the actual people who are playing the sports. And by the way, I do think it's entirely possible that these people may know more about the history of the game and, statistics and knowledge of like dates and all this type of stuff than the people on the court. But the people on the court are the people on the court for a reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, in the context of the game, the people on the court have the most possibility of affecting the outcome of the game. So for me, leadership is all about outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, tell me why you're, if I'm one of those professional players and, I've been invited onto ESPN and they're sharing some of those stats and what so-and-so did, back in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my question to them is like, well, yeah. So what is it that me knowing that's going to do? Like, help me understand what is it that what's the outcome you want to see from me knowing that? How are we getting closer to an outcome, a desired outcome, because you've told me that? Now, apply that to the 98 people. So, you've taken the illustration, you look at it from the angle of commentators and, these sports analysts and so forth. And I'm saying, like, well, what about our everyday lives? My thing is like, the 98 out of 100 people that are sitting in the stands, like, they think they're on the court.
Right.
They literally are. They think they're on the court. Like, they think they're in the game, and they have some impact on the game. But see, this is where leadership becomes just such a solution, such a impactful thing. Because if I can see that as a leader, if I have an organization and I can see the nature of what you and I are talking about, what I begin to discover is that I have a lot of people that are actually, they're not really affecting the game.
Right.
Like, they're, or the way in which they are is very small. I need to get them on the court, and I need to get them out of the judgment of the game and into actually being a player on the court, and occurring for themselves as a player on the court accurately.
Yeah.
Yeah. So working with what is, it's like, yeah, there's just so much opportunity for performance. And we're focused on, in this illustration in the game, we're focused on winning the game.
Yeah.
Now, winning the game may be the focus, or winning the season may be the focus. Probably winning the season. Yeah, I might forego one win of the season for the purpose of winning the season. Yeah, I want to bench some of my better players. I want to give them a chance to do this, or I want to set myself up for something different. Same reason why a company might operate in a negative cash flow position, because they see the value down the road, but there's a bigger picture, there's a bigger outcome. Yeah, well, what are those outcomes? What's the outcomes of the team members, and are they organizing themselves around that? Yeah, most of the time they're not. Like, they're in the stands and they have something to say about the game. And it's like, what if as a leader, you could produce in them leaders? You could produce them occurring for themselves as a leader and being more effective as a leader, such that they actually do impact the game.
Yeah.
That they, in a sense, in their own domain of the game, their own position in the game, whether it's, marketing leader, or whether it's a, copywriter, or whatever it might be, how do we get them to show up in that role such that it becomes them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems like we're getting further away from that as a society than closer. In particular, you look at like social media and these various tools that are like, you actually get rewarded in society for commenting on the game, almost as much as you get for playing.
Totally an illusion, though.
Yeah, it's illusion for sure, but you get like the recognition and trend. Not
from the players.
Not from the players. That is the interesting thing.
Not from the Michael Jordan type players. Not from the leaders.
Yeah.
There's no space. Like, why would one do that? Like, does a Michael Jordan? That's how silly it would be if Michael Jordan stopped and you just said, "Hold on, everybody, stop! Give me the mic." Man, you guys are playing an excellent game up there.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Like, of course he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't even think to do that because he's in the game.
Yeah.
But the players that are in the stands that have a lot to say about the game, they honor each other in it.
They honor each other in it.
Yeah.
Well, that's because there's 98% of them.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Or in your analogy, like
Yeah.
98 out of 100. And so they've got to like, all right, so I'm not going to be in the game. I'm not going to be one of the two people in the game. I'm going to be the best of the 98 that just kind of watch and comment. And maybe I can get something out of this. It's like, a similar analogy, taking it to business, is like, I've never heard anyone talk about like a Business Insider article who's real, right? And I don't mean to pick on that particular publication, but like a real like, hey, did you read this X story about this X CEO who did X? I've never heard that one time from people who are actually in the game. I hear all the time from people who are in the stands.
Yeah, but who's reading the Business Insider?
The stands.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting,
yeah,
right?
the leaders. I've never even read any part of what you're talking about. like I can imagine what it is based off what you say. Yeah, there's no need for me to read that. That's silly. That's like Michael Jordan pausing the game and walking up in the stands and asking people for advice on how to make the next, series of plays.
Yeah.
It's craziness.
So how do you get that 98 to be in the game? That's like your life's work right there.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get real together on this at a different angle though.
Yeah, for sure.
I want, like, some people could be listening to this and they could be going, oh yeah, this all sounds great if you're, if you've got the keys to the car, if your title is CEO or a C level or a VP level or something, sure, I could see it. Well, let's just translate it right into a relationship, like a significant other spouse type relationship. Yeah. What kind of player are you in that? As a person participating, and this is where the illustration breaks down for me in terms of description, because there's nothing about life that's a game. There's nothing about business that's a game. I know some people like to create those kinds of things, and look, I give people space for that. But for me, it minimizes it to the reality of it. Like, if it's a game, then just lose. Like, no big deal. You can just play another game. It's not a game. There's nothing about this that's a game. There's nothing about being married that's a game. So let's apply it to that. What does it look like? Well, how many people are in the stands about that relationship? It would look a little different. It would look something like, you go on a walk with your best friend 3 days a week, and the whole time you guys are trading stories about your partner, about what they aren't and how they don't, and what if they did, and they're just completely reporting on it. How much different does that actually make in the game? Really?
Yeah, they're just giving stats again.
Yeah, it does nothing. In fact, I can tell you it actually can produce the player thinking that they're doing something, and so they go gather more stats.
Right.
Yeah, so while they're with their partner, they're not even with their partner. They're already calculating how they're going to tell their best friend what their partner isn't.
Or therapist or something like that, right? Like, they're, and not to, again, I don't care. But, like, not to diminish therapy or anything like that. I think all that's great.
Sure.
But, like, if you're seeing a therapist every week about your marriage or about X, about whatever problem, right? I could see, giving what you're telling me right now, I could see someone just trying to collect information or facts or statistics that they can then go report on for an hour.
Oh yeah, I experience that all the time. I experience that with people that I work with. It doesn't last very long because I interrupt it, because it doesn't do anything. Yeah, it does. I mean, what's the future that you want to create? Well, I want to be happier in my relationship. Okay, well, how's that working for you? Like, really? Like, tell me how that's going to produce the future that you want. And we start to look at who they're being in it. Yeah, who they're being is a victim. Who they're being is anger or emotion. They're being, revengeful. They're being judgmental. We talked about that already. It's like, yeah, and tell me about the impact that has outside of them. When we look at the domain, this ontological approach to leadership, who are they being? Well, if they're being angry or if they're being judgmental, what sort of an impact would that have outside of you? We know it's consistent with anger or judgment. So what's it like to be with a partner that's got anger and is judging you? I mean, does that have an impact outside of you? There's something consistent with that in terms of an impact. So how is that going to produce for you, the person doing it? How's that going to produce a better relationship in the future?
It's going to do the opposite.
It not only is going to, it already has, and it continues to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we scratch our heads and wonder why, divorce rates at 55%.
Right.
It's not hard to see.
Yeah.
It's not that you weren't in love when you got married. Yeah, it's that you didn't create a future that was consistent with what it would be like to be fulfilled and satisfied in a marriage relationship out in the future.
And it seems like you begin to create a case against each other, or like I can create all the reasons why I should be out of this relationship, or can create all the reasons why. Can you believe that this person is doing this to me? And that type of thing.
Yeah. If you don't do it out there, you do it in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I hope we don't lose people with the sports analogy, because, it's responsive, but there's many other ways we could look at it. But can you imagine somebody like a Michael Jordan sitting in the locker room with his coaches, watching the film of the game before and talking about all the reasons why, he made that bad pass?
Yeah. And blaming it on others.
Yeah. Do you think, look, if you can imagine that, I promise you're in the stands already. Like, I cannot imagine that. Like, I see him looking, assessing, and there's nothing to say. Maybe there's some discovery. Hey, coach, what did you see in that? Or, his other coach, what would you have had me do there? Or, hey, what would you have had me notice about that player and why it went this way? Like, but only from a place of assessment, not judgment, not looking to elevate myself as a player above somebody else, because, like, as a leader, I'm looking to fulfill on the needs of all the relevant parties. My team's part of the relevant party. If I'm pitting myself against my team member, how am I going to be a good leader in the nature of the game? So, yeah, you apply that to marriage, or you apply that to a parental relationship. You apply that to a sibling relationship. You know how many people I run across that have estranged relationships in their lives? It's unbelievable. I don't even get it. Like, it makes no sense. There's zero leadership at play.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you work with people, do you like what it seems to me like what you're describing is like, hey, and I actually heard Netflix CEO and founder Reed Hastings say this once. So I don't want to act like I'm coming up with this, but he said, if you can't lead yourself, how could you possibly lead others? Right. And that always like really stuck with me. It's like, oh, that's a really good point. If you can't lead yourself, how could you possibly lead others? And so when you work in the domain of leadership and you're coaching CEOs and working with them, you're talking about more than just their business and how to be a leader inside of their company. You're talking about how to be a leader in their life, which I think is like fundamentally like a completely different conversation than normally gets had.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the only conversation to have for me, because the nature of who you're being, it's domain centric. Like, who I'm being at home isn't necessarily who I'm being at my office. That's why, there's a quote that gets thrown around a lot that I just fundamentally don't agree with. And it's the quote that says, how you do one thing's how you do everything. It's like, that's so not true. Like people show up for work differently than they show up at home. I don't even know how we can subscribe. That's that 98% that would love to say that's the way it is. Like, I don't see it like that. Who you're being has an impact outside of you, and you have different ways of being based on your perception of the circumstances, based on your relationships and how you see yourself in them, based on people. But one thing we can do is, if we go upstream, which is what you're pointing at in this idea, it's like, well, for you, what's going to make the biggest difference? Who's the player on the court you can have the most to do with? It's you. Like, it's 100% you. So looking at yourself in the domain of leadership is to give yourself access to solutions in any domain of your life, regardless of what your title is or what your position is in an organization, or even if you have a professional role out there in the world. I've worked with many stay-at-home parents, CEOs of households, so to speak. Worked with entrepreneurs that don't, solopreneurs that don't have people to lead, so to speak, but they have this vision of something that they're called towards that they want to go create. Yeah, it's great. Like, self-leadership is absolutely upstream. It's the nature of like how to become an effective leader.
There's another thing you said in this conversation a few times that I want to double click on for folks listening or watching, and that is who you're being has an effect outside of you.
Yeah.
And I could see some people hearing that, well, like, who am I being has an effect outside of me? Great. I think I understand that. I'm just like, I think I understand what that means. That seems kind of obvious, but also like it's interesting to like confront it directly. But like, and I'm kind of leading you with this question because I want folks to hear it. What would you say to someone who's like, well, I'm just going to not go outside, and then I won't have an effect outside of me? What would you say to someone like that? Was like, well, I'm just not going to wake up. I'm going to sleep in. I'm going to check out. I'm going to be like, I'm out. I'm out of the game, so to speak. I'm not even in the arena to continue. I'm just not going to go.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to be in the stands.
Yeah. Well, so you're asking that question in relationship to the idea of who they're being when they do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And whether that has an effect outside of them, even when they do that.
Yeah. So there's a concept that I teach that appropriately responds or is responsive to that, what you're asking. And that is that like every person matters. And, a lot of times people hear that and they're like, okay, that's optimistic, or that's Pollyanna. That's nice. It feels good to hear that I matter. And it's like, no, you're not hearing it accurately. I'm not saying that you matter in that way. What I'm saying is you matter whether you think you matter or not, and you matter whether I think you matter or not. And the way I would approach it from the angle of what you just said is that a person that would stay home and say they're just not even going to show up is a person that occurs for themselves as not mattering.
Mm-hmm.
So in the domain of leadership, there's a couple places I'm going to look at this with you. So in the domain of leadership, they occur for themselves as not mattering. And let's say that they have a desired future they want to create, and you're a relevant party within that. They need your help, or they could benefit from something that you do. And whatever impact that has outside of them, I'm not going to say that you can put your finger on what it is. I mean, you could probably guess what it might be or something, but whatever impact that has outside of them that you experience, does it produce something in you that's going to live into whatever future that they want to produce?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, is that going to come to you like a powerful leader over there if they occur for themselves as not mattering?
Yeah, no.
Now, if the future they wanted to produce was they want to disappear and they don't want anybody to be in their world and they just want to be by themselves, you could say, okay, well, that would be a way of being that would produce an impact outside of them that is consistent with the outcome they desire. So,
but even then, like, you'd have to have no relationships or responsibilities at all for that to
look,
be.
I would say there's a lot of people that show up from this place.
Yeah.
It may not look like they stay home and, and stay in bed. And it could look like that.
Mm-hmm.
What it most commonly looks like is they sit in a strategy meeting and they have an idea and they don't share it. Or they share one idea and they have an experience of somebody else thinking that their idea didn't matter, and they occur for themselves as not mattering, so they don't share any more ideas.
Yeah.
So that's one angle. The other angle is that if a person stays home, it still has an impact.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so they matter. That's the whole, the whole point here is that you matter whether you want to or not. And so, like, to occur for myself as not mattering is inconsistent with what's happening. So, I think that's said well enough that someone would hear it.
Well, I think what probably the most impactful thing I've ever heard you say is that you matter. You matter as much as no one matters more than you, and you don't matter more than anyone else. I think that's how you said it. I think about that all the time. Like, I actually think about that like once a day.
Yeah.
Like, no one matters more than you, and you don't matter more than anyone else. That is the truth. But we don't act in that.
No, we don't behave
way. We don't
with
behave that way, right? We don't behave as though we matter as much as everybody else.
Yeah.
Or we don't behave as though we don't matter more than anyone else, right? Because you kind of get both sides of this, right? Like, the ego is an interesting thing. There are some folks, and Michael Jordan actually might actually be one of these people who's like, I matter more than anyone, right? He might actually be like a legitimate psychopath in a good way, right? And like, in order to achieve like that,
he believed he could affect the game.
Yeah.
But that's different than saying I matter more than someone else. That's different. That's a different domain.
Mm-hmm.
See, if I take on and so we began our conversation kind of pointing at the nature of being a human being,
mm-hmm.
and you mentioned ego. So judgment lives inside of ego. Like, there's a comparison happening, something
mm-hmm.
that shouldn't be, and it's an impact on me. Our amygdala fires as a human. It's in protection mode. Well, so what if I have a hierarchy of mattering? Well, that's in the domain of leadership. That's great until it's not great. So I walk in and I survey the room, and I'm the most mattered person in the room. So now I have access to being a powerful leader for myself because I matter. Next meeting, I show up. I've already looked at the people on the invite. I'm that guy. I'm the guy at the top in my own mind, irregardless of what everyone else thinks. And then I discover when I walk in that we have a special guest that's, Governor Cox has come in, or somebody else that I hold out, Michael Jordan's there or something.
Yeah. It's the only time Governor Cox will ever be compared to Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
That's right. So, so in the domain of leadership, how is that going to work? So having a hierarchy of mattering doesn't work. Now, let's apply it as a leader now. If I look through those people whom are relevant parties for me in the domain of the future I'm committed to creating, and how I experience people under me as they don't matter, sort of an impact do you think that's going to have?
Yeah. Yeah, that aspect of leadership I actually think is really interesting. How often do you, because you're saying something that the whole society is dealing with. I mean, the word matter has become a big thing over the past decade or so in all sorts of domains. And again, it's not that useful to get into that type of stuff. But when you personalize it and when you bring it down to what we're talking about, which is like self-leadership and how do I take responsibility for myself and how do I, all of these things that we're kind of getting into. I wonder how often you bump into the opposite problem of people thinking that they matter too much or they matter more than anyone else.
Yeah, I don't think a person can matter too much. I think
that's a good way.
It only, the too much shows up when it's judged against someone else.
Interesting. Yeah. How often do you bump into that where people are, where you're kind of helping leaders do the opposite? Like, hey, yeah, you matter, and it's not possible to matter too much. But, the other people in the room matter too, and as much as you.
Yeah. I don't think I bump into it like you're saying that much, because a natural correlated outcome of the nature of my work is that you see people as they are. So I can't think of a time where I've actually been in a conversation like that.
Right.
Because we're so far upstream, and we're looking at the nature of who they're being as a leader, and it naturally downstream correlates to seeing that everyone matters. I've never actually taught a client in the way you just described. I don't need to.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's actually a fascinating answer to that. Another word I want us to define that you brought up a number of times in this conversation is power. I think people could hear that in all sorts of ways and maybe even misconstrue what you mean by power. And I think it might be worth you explaining your definition of power and what you mean by that.
Yeah. No, I love that you asked that question, Clint, because I think it is misconstrued. And especially when you're in the stands and you're Monday morning quarterbacking, so to speak, or even in the domain of the game and it's live time, and you're hearing the word power like it's a problem, when the way I'm using the word power would not be consistent with that. Like, that to me is like a wake-up call. So I love that you're asking the question. Power for me simply is an energy force outside of oneself. Now, power is the ability to produce an impact outside of you. And power is not force, not in the way I hold it. So power is like this, we use the term powerful, be a powerful leader. Well, what does a powerful leader mean? Well, certainly doesn't mean a forceful leader. Because nobody actually experiences a forceful leader as like effective leadership. So there's a consistency with the word power that means effective. That for me means being effective, having that energy force outside of you, similar in nature to the impact that who you're being has outside of oneself. So let me give you an example of power in that way. So let's say you and I are having, a slight disagreement about something, and I'm getting worked up over where I am. I'm not saying I'm getting worked up, but who I'm being for you is worked up.
Yeah. And
at a certain point inside of our conversation, you're aware enough to see that. And what you're desiring is that I have some, that I be patient with you through the process. So at some point you slow me down because we're going back and forth, and you say, hey, well, hang on, just can you be patient with me? And my response to you is, I am being patient with you.
Yeah.
Now, I can say that. So I put language to it. I can say that. But does me saying that mean that that's who I'm being? I'm being patient. How would you see that?
No.
And we know that because, we have all these relationships that we interact in, and people declare who they're being all the time. But who they're being isn't always consistent with the experience that we're having. So I can tell you I'm being patient. And it doesn't change what's happening over where you are as a person experiencing me. It might have some influence on it, but doesn't change it. So how do you have an experience of me being patient? It's when I'm being patient. Right. And it's not because I'm declaring that I'm being patient. So what is that? What is that impact? Well, to me, that's power. Like, I can actually produce patience over where you are by being patient. And I don't have to say, hey, watch, I'm going to be patient with you. And then that's, I can see that you're getting worked up now. So I'm going to be patient, and then it's going to have a impact over where you are called patience. And then you'll begin to operate with me from a place of being more patient than you're currently being. Now, if I said all that to you, what would your ego do? No, you don't. No way. I don't need to say it. I just be it. And as I'm being it, it produces an impact that's consistent with that. So we know, in this example, I think most of us have had that experience, like what it's like to be with a teacher. It's being patient with you when you don't understand something. It changes how you learn. It changes what you have access to for yourself. Do you know what it's like to learn from somebody that's a teacher that's being impatient with you? It makes it more difficult to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's power.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Another way of describing power, and I love this way. I don't know if other people can relate to it like this, but like being a powerful leader changes the way those you're leading get out of bed in the morning. Like, well, wait, what does that mean? Like, that seems kind of strange. Well, no, just pay attention to how you get out of bed in the morning. You look at your calendar the night before and you're like, oh, I have lunch with Clint Betts tomorrow. Yeah, I can't wait to be with him. I'm going to make sure I get up early. You might not think all of this, but it's going to happen. I'm going to make sure I get up early enough that I can get all the stuff done so that I can be on time, because what I know about Clint is he's going to be on time. And I want to be on time. And I don't want to miss the time we have together, because the time we have together is going to be powerful or meaningful to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it changes the way I get out of bed in the morning because I'm going to meet you. Now, let's flip that around, and let's say that you being you the listener, you the viewer, are a person that's on somebody's schedule tomorrow. And they look at their calendar the night before and they realize that they're meeting with you. And the way they get out of bed is like, I really don't want to go to this meeting. That's power too, but it's not useful power.
Yeah.
So most of the time when I describe power, I'm speaking to it from a place of it being useful.
Yeah. And you have a course, and you have a course coming up that is called Create Powerful. How long have you been doing it?
I began doing the course in 2016, and I've done 13 of them. This will be the 14th course.
And you do it out in California, right?
We do. We do it at the Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Niguel, California. It's a special place. There's a reason why we do it there. I've trained the staff there. Anybody that lives around me or with me or has interacted with me knows that I'm intentional. So the course is an intentional experience.
And can you explain what the course, like it's a 3-day course, 2.5 day, 3 day. Explain what the course is to people, because I think for those who are interested in learning more about kind of what you've described here on this show, it would be useful for them to at least check it out.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, thanks for asking about it. So the course was originally designed to be once. It came at the request of 3 independent clients that we were working with. And, they, independent of each other, they asked me if I would be willing to do something that they could invite friends, family, business partners, and so forth to. And so I had a lot of hesitation to do it. I see a lot of power in the nature of the work I do in a very controlled environment, and the idea of being in that environment didn't excite me.
Mm-hmm.
But through, I create creators, I create leaders, and they were effective enough to get me to see it as a possibility. It's kind of difficult when you teach people that anything is possible and that they turn it back on you.
Yeah.
And they say, well, you teach me anything is possible. Why isn't it possible that you can create this? So it's like, yeah, you're right. And so I went back and I put my heart and soul into creating a curriculum, and I call it a course for a reason. It's not a workshop. It's not a seminar. And for the most part, for most people, it's like nothing they've ever been to.
Yeah.
And you've been to the course.
I've been to it. It's unlike anything I've ever been to, for sure.
And so I did the course one time, September of 2016. And out of that, I created 85 leaders. And they were successful enough to help me see the value of doing one more course. And so for about 3 or 4 courses, that's the way it went. And each time, so first, let me just say, the very first course that I did, without question, I was the biggest, most impacted student in the room. I learned that the nature of what I teach is possible in that environment, and it was moving. And every course has been a process of, discovery, assessment, and we've progressed the course just like any good leader would progress. And the course itself is designed for any person. That's one of the phenomena of the course, is that I can have a CEO running a multi-billion-dollar organization in the room, or executives of such. I can have a solopreneur or an entrepreneur. I can have somebody that's not employed. I can have a stay-at-home parent in the room. I can even have a later teen or a college student in the room, and the course meets you where you are. And what's really great about this work is that it's, we're looking at the fundamental aspects of what it is to be a human being, and create you as a human being, being a person that exercises leadership effectively as your natural self-expression, so unique to you in the sense, and that can show up in any of those environments, and it does. And what it takes to be a leader, in a small business is the same thing it takes to be a leader in a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar organization.
Yeah.
And so what I've done is I've taken this methodology and I've created an experience with what is being taught. So there's a special way in which the course is executed on that produces a person getting access to the experience of what's being taught. And I'm able to do that in a way that still gives people space to come into a room, and they're not called out, they're not called on, they're not like, nobody gets handled, there's no force. One of the greatest things about the course itself is that we demonstrate what we teach. So we literally, in a powerful way, produce outcomes in the course. They're promises, and we guarantee them. Like, you can just count on them. If you bring yourself to this environment from a committed place, and you just come with an opening that there could be something there for you, it's a guarantee.
Yeah. And the name of your company is Ontocore. I'm guessing because of the study of ontology.
Yeah.
And so you were very intentional with the name. And so if people want to check out the course, it's ontocore.com/createpowerful. Is that right? So check out the course there. Let's talk about your actual core work as well at Ontocore, where you coach. Would you call it coach? I mean, how would you describe? I don't really consider you a coach, but I guess that's what the world would.
Well, how would you describe the formal working relationship that you and I have had in the past?
You're like a teacher, or yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Probably a coach, actually. Yeah. Yeah. So what would be useful for me to say about the core work? Because I mean, you're suggesting accurately so that the course, the 3-day leadership course called Create Powerful, it's not the core work. It's the only public facing thing that we do. And it lives on its own, and it's not something that, this podcast will live much longer than the course will. We'll do them, got 1 or 2 more on the books. There's a pretty high likelihood we won't continue to do them. Yeah. Simply because of the core work. So what would you have me say about that? Well, tell me about the core work. How did you get started in that? What results have you seen? Because the core work, like you said, you don't have to be a client to go to the Create Powerful course. You don't have to do any of that type of stuff, right? Yeah. Highly recommend people do this. The course, to get an introduction and everything that we've kind of given them a brief introduction here, but the course is really where You can go deeper on a lot of these concepts that you're teaching. But
not just deeper. So remember, we don't take an epistemological approach.
Yeah.
So like the way most people hear that is like, oh, I'm going to get more knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
No. Like you come out of the course knowing less than what you knew when you came in. But you're more effective at creating outcomes that you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so my question to you is on Ontocore and your core work, what is that work? What does that entail? What does it mean to work with Brandon Craig?
It's miraculous. It's transformative. It means outcomes. So why are you smiling at that?
Because it's true.
Yeah. So yeah, there's two, in a sense, there's two ways in which I work with somebody. One is personally, we have a coaching relationship. When somebody works with me, they commit to a year up front, and I commit to a year. And a lot of times those relationships last much longer than a year. But not because of need, but because of the return on the investment of the time and so forth. The nature of this work is all about outcomes. If we weren't getting outcomes, we wouldn't stay working together. That's you could count on that. And that goes both ways, by the way. Like I'm really selective on who I work with. And then the only other way in which I work with somebody is it really looks the same, but it's more of a corporate engagement where I have a special partnership with the CEO or the person running the organization. And then we also work with their closely held direct report leaders, usually a C-suite or their leadership team. And we always get a head start with the leader, as the leader's got to stay the leader. We don't want your leaders having an experience that I'm the leader.
Right.
Yeah, that wouldn't work. So create the leader as the leader, and then we bring in the executive team, and it's all creation. And that methodology and model of leadership it's the same words. It's miraculous and it transforms organizations. The beautiful thing is that it's still touching people's lives. Yeah. So the companies that I get to work with most of the time, and I'm happy, I like it this way. I don't need it this way, but I like it this way. Most of the organization doesn't even know I exist. They don't need to. They have an upgraded experience of the leadership of the leader and the leader's executive team, and they see it through the leadership of the leader, and that cascades through the organization, and they have like a real sense that there's something there, and they see it straight into the leadership of the company, and the outcomes follow and so forth. So, there are a lot of people that like the front stage, and they want to go train all the employees. And no, I want to create leaders that do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Brandon, I can't thank you enough for coming up here. You live in Arizona. You flew all the way to Utah just for this. We had an agreement. It might actually be good to talk about agreements before we end here, but we had an agreement that you would be here at 10:30. And the thing that I know about you is you're going to be here at 10:30, no matter what. And there's very few people in my life who it's like, I guarantee that person is showing up when they said that they will show up. And so maybe to end, we talk about agreements, because I think that's another interesting piece of your work and an interesting piece of my experience with you. I woke up this morning knowing at 10:30 I was going to be having a conversation with you. And in my position, and probably in yours too, it's not always a guarantee that the other person's going to be there. Right? Yeah. Or show up in the way where I also knew you were going to show up in a way that you were ready for this conversation, right? And excited to have this guy and everything that goes with that. And so maybe, again, to end, and again, everyone should go to ontocore.com. Maybe we talk a little bit about agreements, what that terminology and the definition of that is to you, because again, I could see that being misconstrued.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you're describing power.
Mm-hmm.
Like you woke up this morning thinking about, and you've had a certain experience of me, and you mentioned like, hey, in your professional life, there are not a lot of people that show up in ways in which you can count on them, particularly in this case around time or maybe even being prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And the first place I'd have you look is at yourself.
I'm one of those people.
Yeah. Well, not just that you're one of those people. I'm not suggesting you're one of those people, but I don't have clients that show up late.
Yep.
You know that.
Yeah, I do know that.
You don't show up late in our work together. Like there's when we're looking at who I'm being as a person that's going to be here at 10:30, when I said I would, there is this form of an agreement that's at play, which I'll speak to, but then there's also the nature of integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's something that we speak a lot about and teach a lot about in the nature of the course. And there's some very clear definitions around integrity that can help a person really discover how being integral produces power. And this is a perfect example of that, is that I'm going to be my word with you. Mm-hmm. And if I say I'm going to be here at 10:30, you can count on I'm going to be here at 10:30. And that has a powerful impact over there. If I were working for you and I made a promise to you, and by the way, most people don't see it like a promise, but when they agree to something, they're giving their word, they're making a promise that I'm going to have a certain project done by, 4:30 on Friday afternoon. And if you can count on that, yeah, we have the opportunity for performance in our relationship. If you can't count on that, we're out of integrity in the nature of our relationship, and it produces a huge impact on performance. Mm-hmm. So as you probably gathered, like the nature of the work that I do produces in an organization, it produces a culture of coaching, a culture of performance, and a culture of leadership. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that definition of leadership, as a leader, wouldn't you want leaders? Wouldn't you want people that self-lead, that have a command over themselves? I mean, it just changes everything in the nature of what you're doing. So back to your point about agreements. Agreements are a way to produce performance in a relationship and also liberate your relationships. There's a lot of power at play in relationships that's not effective. And, for everyone listening, it'd be important for you to really hear that. Like, notice somebody that doesn't, keep their word with you, or notice somebody that's not performing in some way. Notice somebody that you might say you have conflict with, or that you don't get along with, or something. And notice how that has an impact in how you show up. Mm-hmm. And vice versa. You're producing that in other people. And the question is like, how do I produce a relationship of liberation where that's not happening and I can still get access to performance? And one element at play in that is how to create and produce agreements as a way of being, which, that's a big statement to end on. Mm-hmm. But it's, there's I think a 9-page article that we have the course members read that's called Agreements as a Distinction. And it describes the nature of who you're being when you create agreements. Agreements are a creation. If you're not creating the agreement, you're simply doing something other than that, and it's likely you're producing some sort of expectation. And agreements are not expectations. Agreements are expectations negate the possibility of a liberated and powerful performance-oriented relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an art form of true relationship. How do we create agreements that are powerful so that a person over there fulfills on that agreement?
Yeah.
And participates in the agreement as a co-creator. Like, telling somebody what the agreement is that would not be what I'm teaching.
Yeah.
It's a co-creation. You've got to co-create an agreement. The person over there that you're looking to produce and create an agreement with must see themselves being able to fulfill on that agreement. If I couldn't see that I could be here at 10:30 today, then how silly would it be for me to say that I would be here? Well, pay attention to your life and look at how many times you're setting people up like that as the leader, looking to produce a certain outcome over there.
Yeah.
And you're literally living into the non-performance of the agreement because you're not creating effective and powerful agreements.
Well, you're very careful about the agreements you enter into, right? And you teach that as well. It's like, don't just flippantly make agreements.
No, I mean, we all know what it's like to show up and having thought that we fulfilled on an agreement to discover we didn't understand what it was.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, you probably have this more of an experience of somebody showing up and they think they've fulfilled on the agreement that you had with them.
Yeah.
And for you, it wasn't what you agreed to.
Yeah.
So not only am I more careful about it from that standpoint, I'm also more careful about it in the sense that, like, if I don't know how to if I can't see myself keeping an agreement, I mean, I am my word. Like, if I can't do that, it diminishes me.
Yeah.
And, some people would have a hard time relating to that, and it's likely because they've done it so long, there's just nothing left of them. So it doesn't feel like it has any impact.
Right.
I promise you, it has a huge impact.
Yeah. Brandon, thank you so much for coming on. Those listening, watching, seriously go to Ontocore.com. Check out the course, Ontocore.com/createpowerful. I'm sure we'll have you on again at some point, Brandon. Thank you so much for making the trip up.
Yeah. Thank you, Clint. And listen, thank you for the work that you're doing in the community, both here in Silicon Slopes and some of the other work that you're doing that's impactful, that's producing and helping create opportunities for leaders to grow and connect. And you and I have had enough experience together. We have some sense of what you're up to, and it's really, really incredible, including you as a representation of Silicon Slopes, and what Silicon Slopes has already done and continues to do is really incredible. Like, it's a great demonstration of what's possible when you organize people for a vision with a clarity and with language, and then you have a leader that demonstrates that, lives consistent with it. So I applaud what you've created, and your community is amazing. I have several clients in your community. I've worked with some of the Utah State top government leaders. Like, this is a very special community. And there's a lot to be said for what you guys have done here collectively, both you as a leader, your organization, and the members of the community. Everybody's a relevant party here.
Yeah. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.